Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Building a Great Culture webinar series, where we talk to industry leaders and dive into what it means to keep employees happy, healthy, and engaged. I'm your host, Sarah Troop, Director of Engagement Strategy with Motion Connected, and we have got a great show for you all today. We are here with Dr. Tamara Beckford. Dr. Beckford is a board certified emergency medicine doctor, but she's also a author, speaker, and CEO of Your Caring Docs. She trains companies on employee wellness strategies that reduce stress in the workplace and improve intention and help lower healthcare related costs. She hosts the Dr. Beckford Show and has interviewed over 235 physicians about their self care and their work outside of clinical medicine. Dr. Beckford has been featured in Forbes, Yahoo Finance, Voyage Houston, LinkedIn News, Rolling Out Magazine, and Kevin MD. We'll be talking about a popular topic, the importance of taking care of oneself to prevent burnout. So, without further ado, let's dive right into it. Welcome, Dr. Beckford, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to be here with you and all of your wonderful audience.
Oh, we're excited too. We would love to hear a little bit more about yourself from you,
Mhm.
and I'd really love to understand how you became passionate about the subject of burnout.
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I am an emergency medicine physician, and burnout really came into play during the pandemic, but it's not the way that you would have expected it. I noticed during the pandemic that I was actually faring out pretty well and I wasn't burning out, contrary to what was going on with my colleagues. It was so pronounced that my medical director, during the infamous one-to-ones that we'll talk about later on today, he mentioned it. He said, "You're actually doing pretty well during this time." Now, it had me reflecting why. And when I think about it, it was because of all the work I started doing back in 2019. In 2019, I became a little restless and, started to think about what else is it that I can contribute. I know most people are probably like, "What do you mean? You're a doctor." I understand that, but I wanted to be able to contribute more to the world. And in order to
Mhm.
do so, I started to work on more a lot of personal development. So reading more, really diving into how the mind works, diving into
Mm.
things that bring wellness to oneself, recognizing the importance of things such as gratitude practices, recognizing the importance of a morning routine, being able to enter into the day as opposed to having the day enter into you. So, all that I started pouring into myself in 2019 became the vehicle that drove me in 2020 and 2021 during the height of the pandemic. So, although I saw a lot of devastation around me, I was able to keep myself grounded. And in doing so, I was able to be a more effective physician because those who are going through the strife, those who are going through the loss, a lot of the stress and anxiety that my patients had, I was able to keep calm and to bring reassurance. So that's the benefit of really diving in and understanding how burnout prevention is so important. After recognizing that within myself, I said, I cannot hold this. I need to be able to spread this news, to spread this to others. And that's when I went on and started talking about burnout and burnout prevention, and then got the attention of some of the places that you just mentioned, such as LinkedIn and Yahoo Finance and so on. So that's how I
Oh,
got started.
that's wonderful, and it's actually quite recent then, and the
Mhm.
timing is perfect, right when we really ended up needing that. Well, let's maybe start with the basics, and then let's just define and talk about what is burnout.
Yes. So burnout, and we'll see it on the other slide. And this is so important. So burnout is a physiological response, and it's a condition to chronic stress within the workplace. So it's chronic workplace stress. It's not oh, today I just don't feel like it. Oh,
Mhm.
tomorrow I'm feeling great. It's a pileup in of stress that's been mounting and mounting to the point that one is unable to cope, unable to manage. It starts to have effects not just on the psyche, but also emotionally and physically on the body. So, stress, as we said, it's burnout, pardon me, is a physiological and a psychological condition that is a response to chronic workplace related stress. So that's the standard definition of burnout.
And how do you usually typically see that characterized?
So burnout is characterized by a few things. I actually have a mnemonic that I call the 3 Ds. And the first D is depletion. And the depletion is the emotional exhaustion. Now, we've all been through that. A day where we woke up tired, we went to bed tired. And if you had a few hours of rest, you had a weekend to get over it and you felt better, and you're like, oh, I'm energized to go back to work. The difference between that and burnout is that no matter how much rest that you've had, you still feel emotionally exhausted. So
Mm.
that gives you an idea that, okay, maybe this isn't just that I'm tired, it's that I'm heading towards burnout. Another
Mhm.
part of burnout is the depersonalization. So when we are in a job, we usually feel like there's a cause, you feel connected to it. When you start to become cynical and you don't feel connected to those you're working with or even the job within itself, you start to depersonalize it. And that's when you know,
Mm.
okay, burnout is creeping in. Another element of burnout is a decreased sense of accomplishment in your work. Whatever you're doing, although others are telling you you're doing such a great job, your work is so impactful. Wow, you've done such a great job by doing A, B, and C, and the results are here. Look at the change that you've made. You don't see it. You're like, I'm not really feeling as if I'm making an impact. Like, what is my purpose here? What is my joy? There's no joy in even the satisfaction of accomplishing any goals. So once you're
Mhm.
starting to have depletion, which is emotionally exhaustion, the depersonalization, cynicism with the job, decreased sense of accomplishment, then you know that you've hit the burnout zone.
Wow, I can see now the difference between that and maybe just a stressful situation, right? A point in
Absolutely.
time where so you're just not having recovery, even if there's recovery periods in there.
No, there isn't a
Mhm.
recovery. When another thing that you can see is initially when we talk about emotional exhaustion, we've all had periods where we're like I mentioned, you go to bed tired, you wake up tired, you get a weekend of rest and you're feeling great. With this emotional exhaustion, these are the people who are crying before going into work.
Oh,
These are the people who are in their cars, they have their head on the steering wheel, and then they're crying, why do I have to be here? And then they're fixing themselves up and then headed into work. The deep sigh and the constant
mhm.
deep sigh. These are the people with the tension. And although you were in a good mood prior, as soon as you hit the parking lot, everything changes. So that's what happens when you know that you've hit burnout.
Oh, that's
Mhm.
interesting. So I guess one of the most important basic first steps would be to identify burnout. What tips do you have for us for that?
Yeah, there are a couple of things with burnout. Now, a lot of times when people hear burnout, they think it's a switch on and off, like, oh, I'm burnt
Mhm.
out. Oh, I'm feeling better today. Oh, I'm burnt out. But no, burnout, it's a phase. So there are phases to it. And there are 5 phases to burnout, which I think it's important for those who are watching to realize. And, keep some of this in mind. So phase one is the honeymoon phase. We have just gotten the job or we've been in the job for a while and we're still excited when we think about the impact that we're having, when we think about going to work. I cannot wait to go to work to connect with my colleagues and we're having a good time. We're making a great impact. So that's the honeymoon phase of burnout, right? You might be wondering, is burnout in there? That's
Yeah.
part one. Part two now is the onset of stress. That's when the workload starts to pile on. Now, with the onset of stress, it's important to recognize, and you're going to hear me talk about stress a lot. Stress is still important within our lives. It's not that we want a life completely without stress, it's important. However, the chronic stress, to not be able to handle it, that's what we don't want to have happen. So, with the onset of stress, you start to notice that your workload is kind of tilting, but you're still able to manage it. You're still able to get the job done. You still can sigh, like, oh, wow, this happened. I was able to finish and accomplish my goal in time, right? Now,
Yeah.
when we move on from the onset of stress, then we start moving on to chronic stress. Then you start to have some unrealistic expectations. Either you've put it on yourself or it's been brought upon you. So the workload is starting to mount. So you're no
Mhm.
longer able to handle it and have that release, that dopamine release of, "Oh, I've been under, able to get this done. I feel so great. I feel accomplished." That's the dopamine release. Yes, great. No, you're just consistently just stressed. That
Mm.
starts to bring on some of the physiological changes within our body. The headache that just won't go away. I've gone to the doctor. I've gotten tons of imaging done. We've done all the tests, but I'm still having that headache, that upset stomach, that you've gotten scoped from top to bottom and nothing is there, right? So you're having these physiological symptoms in
Mhm.
addition to the mental load of stress. And that's when we're on that chronic phase. Now we move from the chronic phase to phase four, which is the actual burnout, which we've described, right? The
Yeah.
emotional exhaustion, the depersonalization, the detachment, the lack of accomplishment in the work. When you're at that phase, the challenge is that you start to have creeping in of some psychiatric and mental illness. The helplessness and hopelessness starts to come in. And this is why it's so important for us to acknowledge burnout. The helplessness and hopelessness that creeps in, those from the medical standpoint, are some of the phases and the terms that are used for depression. So people start to feel signs. So these are some early signs, that depression can be on its way if it's not being addressed. If burnout is not being addressed, then we can head into depression and anxiety. Now, phase five is a phase that we really don't want, which is the crisis phase. And this one truly will bring on some of those mental challenges. I've had this before, being in the emergency department where I've seen people who have lost a lot. And from the psychiatric standpoint, the emergency department is a crisis center. So if one is in any crisis mode, you can always go to an emergency department and they'll be able to get you the care that you need from the psychiatric standpoint. So in that area, I've seen a particular gentleman in mind, where he was working within one of the tech industries. So the stress started to mount. He was unable to manage that stress. At that point, he had life. He was engaged, to be married, just, things were looking on the up and up. The stress started to mount. Unfortunately, when people become stressed, they start to use coping mechanisms, right? So we have
Yeah.
good coping mechanisms that we talked about, like, such as the gratitude practice, taking some time off, or just, even a morning routine, meditation. Those are some coping mechanism. Exercise, yoga, reading, socializing with like-minded people. And then we have the other coping mechanisms, which are alcohol, drugs, So unfortunately, alcohol became his choice to cope. As that mounted, the stress mounted, the amount of alcohol increased, and he eventually lost his job. He lost his job, he lost his relationship. And losing the
Mm.
relationship now meant that he lost his home. He had to move in with family. The part that is so critical when we talk about this crisis mode is this gentleman, his brother, luckily overheard him saying, I'm just going to give it up. I'm just not, it's not worth it. So that's the helplessness and hopelessness. And the patient was on his way to buy a gun to end his life. And luckily, his brother overheard him and brought him to the crisis center, which is the emergency department. So, although we talk about burnout and we hear people saying, oh, burnout is just, yeah, it's important, but you know, if they do A, B, and C, they'll just be able to get over it. No, it really
Mhm.
can lead to crisis. And this is why we're having this wonderful conversation. So, those on the other side can hear and understand the importance of burnout and burnout prevention within the workplace.
Wow, that's so interesting. What a vicious cycle it is when you start to lose your purpose and you start to lose your social circle, and it has to
Mhm.
be even harder to get out of crisis at that point. Hmm.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's so important that when we see this, we can intervene. And this is why it's so important for us, those who are leaders, because if you have someone who's going through it, we all know when you're going through it, can you sometimes see it? But the other person can see you going through it and they can
Hmm.
help to intervene. But you can intervene when you understand and know the signs.
Looking
And
for.
that's why we're having this conversation.
And then how about those physiological signs? That has to distract from the burnout issue itself. I mean, is it going
Mhm.
down a rabbit hole to find out what's causing that headache or those stomach issues?
Absolutely. Because what ends up happening is that you're starting to have your team, like a lot of absenteeisms, right? So if your team
Mhm.
members, they're going through stress and they're going through burnout, then you're going to notice that they're consistently going to the doctor. They're having to
Mhm.
take the time off because they're having these issues. They can't come in because they're having these issues. And the other importance of burnout affects, when we talk about the emotional aspects and the physiological aspects, all of us in our jobs, we need to be able to use our executive function, which is the frontal lobe. When you are deep within burnout, executive function barely exists. So now you're in almost as if like you're in a reptilian mode. A, B, C, D. When I think this or that, so it's just snap decisions, but there aren't decisions that require the critical thinking because that function is just not, it's decreased. And this is similarly to what happens with those who are depressed. That's why someone who is so depressed or they're feeling hopeless, they can't even make decisions. Well,
Yeah.
what do you want to eat today? I mean, that is just too much of a decision. So can
Wow.
you imagine now having a worker who is in this mode of burnout and you're trying to have them make decisions for your
Mhm.
job to even help with productivity? They
Mhm.
don't have that executive decision making skills because that energy level in that part is so low. So that's, or some of the headaches that they're having, and then they're having to make decisions. These are some of the upset stomachs, the ulcers. I think I have an ulcer. Well, when you get scoped, you can physically see the ulcer. If someone has done a gastroenterologist, which is a GI doctor, has looked in and looked at every single part of the stomach and don't see the ulcer, then
There's
physically there
something
isn't an
else going
ulcer.
on. Yeah.
But yeah, physiologically, you're having the symptoms of an ulcer.
Very
Yeah.
interesting. Well, that does give us quite a picture of what burnout looks like, and the phases I can see are very significant. I think I'd be
Yeah.
curious at this point. Our audience typically is leaders of corporations and with
Mhm.
stressful jobs, and
Absolutely.
in the wellness industry, a lot of times is more female orientated, and they're taking care of the family and the home and work. So I think it might be interesting at this point if we did a poll um, on how often have you experienced signs of burnout within the last 6 months. So let's see, I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll and
Mhm.
give it a few minutes to for everyone to just pop in there anonymously.
Mm,
I love this morning routine you keep referring to. I hope you expand upon that.
absolutely.
I always say by the time I get to the office, I feel like I've ran a marathon already. So I want to know what I'm doing wrong with my morning routine that I should be doing better.
Absolutely. Well, we can talk about the morning routine meanwhile our members take the poll,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you're okay with it. So, with the
sure.
morning routine, it's really preparing oneself for the day. A lot of times we get up and we immediately just rush and start doing things,
Mhm,
but we
mhm,
haven't done anything for yourself personally, right? You're getting
right.
up, if you have kids, you might get up and start preparing things for the kids. You have a family, get up and start preparing things for the family. Those who might be single or living by themselves, they get up and immediately we're on social media. Oh, I wonder what this person did. Oh, I can't believe, oh, what's going on in the news. There are just so many things that's bombarding us before our mind has even gotten a chance to prepare for the day. So the morning routine starts with the night before.
Oh,
So
that makes
this
a
is,
difference.
I know, this is so exciting. I know. Okay. So it starts by number one, putting the phone away. Now, a
Mm,
lot of us have our phones in arm's length. The phone goes off in the middle of the night. If your notifications on, you can't sleep. You get up and scroll and then you're on, right? And then we know that the
mm,
blue light from the phone, it activates the cells within our eyes. And then the body's like, oh, it's daytime. But no, it's 2 a.m. It's time for you to be asleep if that's your sleeping time. So you
mhm.
already have disrupted your body and physiologically disrupted your body. But when you put the phone away, you allow that to at least stop that interruption. Part two, in having the phone, most of us use our phone as our alarm. If
Arm.
you aren't naturally gifted to wake up when that cortisol rush hits in the morning, I won't
Yeah.
say that I have that strength. So I'll use my phone as my
Mm,
alarm. So the phone is on the other side of the room. When it goes off, get up and pick it up. Now, I used to be, one of the queens of the snooze button. But in
mm.
recognizing having the phone across the room, it reduces the chance that you're going to hit the snooze button. You've
Oh,
already
sure.
gotten up and taken 2 to 3 steps. And so
Yeah.
your body says, well, I'm already up. I might as well. The next part of the morning routine is to engage in something positive for your mind. So
Mm.
for me, I'll listen to either a positive podcast, like you can listen to this one.
Uh-huh.
I'll either do or read something positive. So I'm putting something positive in my head, an affirmation.
Mhm.
For those who are religious, this might be your time to read your Bible or whatever religious book that you have,
Mhm.
but you're pouring into yourself. And
Yeah.
then the next one could be movement. So it does not have to be excessive movement. It could be just a stretch. It could be for those who like to exercise before work, this could be your movement portion. But whatever it is, it's something that gets the body going. And then the body now prepares itself to enter into the day. Some things that happen during this time. Notice I haven't been on social media at all at this point.
True.
Right.
Yes.
So what
Very important.
happened? Yeah, and I have not checked emails and I haven't checked any of yes, I have not checked. Now all of this could be 20 minutes. Do not make this a 2 hour venture and say, "Oh man, Dr. Beckford said I need to get up two
Got my
hours
morning
earlier."
ritual.
Yes, absolutely. This can all be 20 minutes. But within those 20 minutes, you have armed your mind and body and spirit for the day. The difference is now when you enter into the day, you will be responding to things versus reacting to things, right? So the
Okay.
email that would have gotten you flared up, you're
Up.
level headed and you will respond versus react. So this is just so powerful. So these are some of the things that I did. So when I went in to work during the height of the pandemic, where I saw a lot of death, where I saw instead of it reacting to it, I responded. I responded as someone who is there as a comfort to families. I responded as someone who can think level headedly during the times when an emergency happens, such as when one of my patients are extubated themselves, when I have to take care of a husband and wife who are both elderly and the family might lose them both. There's a difference with reacting, being agitated, and being able to respond in a calm manner. That's
Mm.
what preparing your day does for you.
Oh, I love it. That's a great start. Just great takeaway already. Let's see
Mhm.
if anybody needs a morning routine. We'll go to the poll. End and share results. Let's see if that works. All right. Can you see the results, Dr. Beckford?
I do. It seems like over 80% of the people. So we have
Right.
47% of you saying, occasionally I felt burnout within the last 6 months, and 41% frequently are feeling burnout within the last 6 months, and only 12% says, rarely. Now, 0% says none at all.
Oh, that's not
No,
good.
none at all. So,
Mhm.
recognizing, as we're mentioning, the different signs and symptoms of burnouts, which is the emotional exhaustion that a weekend is not getting rid of, the depletion, which is the emotional exhaustion, the detachment, the cynicism, and also the lack of accomplishment when you're even providing wonderful care or wonderful services or wonderful results within your job, then you don't even feel that well about it.
Wow. Very enlightening. All right. So since we have so many care people that care for the employees on the
Yeah.
call, let's switch gears from maybe ourselves
Hmm.
to what signs we should look for in a team burnout.
Absolutely. So, with a team burnout, there are a few key indicators that you can keep in mind when you're a leader of the team, when you're in HR. The best thing is that you've done a poll or you're starting to hear little words that's going around, such as, "Ugh, I don't even trust the management. I don't,
Mhm.
so a lack of trust is a sign that your team might be experiencing burnout. Another thing that you might say is favoritism. The same people keeps getting all of the great things over and over, and I've gone up and I haven't, and the same people. So when you start hearing things like that, that's giving
Mhm.
signs that they're saying, okay, they feel as if favoritism is happening, and that could be and also a sign that they're feeling burnt out. I can't even do anything without they're just stooping over my shoulders. I can't look left. I can't look right. Everyone is just constantly over my shoulder. They gave me the task, and every 2 minutes they're asking me to do this and to show them and to show them. That's the micromanagement. So, constantly feeling micromanaged, those are signs that the team might be feeling burnt out. So, lack of trust, and this when they poll people, like 3 times the amount of people will start feeling that way when they are polled, and people who have left for reasons of burnout. And 3 times also feel the same way about favoritism, and 2 times around micromanagement. So when you really think about it, when you're starting to hear these thoughts that are being either whispered over at now it might be you know through the team meetings or through the hallways at the water cooler per se. That's when you know. And a great way to find this out too is to really connect with your team and to either send out surveys or to talk with them.
Mhm. I can imagine the power of conversation could go a long way.
Absolutely.
So these probably wouldn't be the things I would have looked for burnout in a
Mhm,
team. Very, very interesting. So if you do start to
mhm.
see that, what are some of the things that our leaders can do to approach burnout for their
All
team?
righty. So the best thing that we can do to approach burnout is one is acknowledging. So the thing that's really interesting, as a leader, you have so much impact on the team physiologically and even psychologically. They said almost 70% of managers have more of a mental impact on their teams more than who doctors and their therapists. So
Wow.
this is not to put stress on you, but this is to just let you know how impactful your work is. So number one, acknowledging that stress and burnout exist within the team. And then you can be upfront and then letting them know, okay, here are some of the things that we have within our structures. Because as HR leaders, a lot of times you have a lot of resources. If you do, if you don't have a lot of resources, then this is the time for you to pull it in. But if you
Mm,
do have those resources, many of your employees might not realize what you have, right?
yeah.
So they
Hmm.
might hear things like EAP programs, but I don't understand what that means. So these are
Hmm.
great ways to introduce it to the team. You can do that through their leaders, or you can do it through one of the meetings. Say, hey, by the way, these are some great things that we have available just to let you know. Now, this is not saying that you're addressing it only when it happens. You can make it be known ahead of time because different people on the team go through different phases at different periods of time. When they know what exists to help them, then they're more likely to take advantage of what you as a leader have provided. Another thing to now is training our leaders, as we've mentioned, to recognize and see the signs of burnout within the team, such as we did on the other slides. When we're hearing some of these things, it's not something for you to take personal. It's something to say, wow, maybe this burnout thing is going on with the team. It's time for us to have a training session, or B, make them aware of what we have available so that
Hmm.
they can prevent getting to that crisis mode or even to the full burnout mode, right? And
Yeah.
then another thing is being flexible. If you have the ability to be flexible within your team, such as I know that this is a big topic about working from home versus being in the office. Now, if we have the ability and you do within your structure, then, implement some of it, right? If you don't have the ability, then think about other ways that you can provide for the team, such as outcome driven. So it's great for the team to know that I'm happy that you spent 35 hours on this, but did you need to spend 35 hours? I really needed it done, not the amount of hours. So if
Mm,
you're able to do it in a shorter period of time, I'd love it. Not that I'm putting stress on you, but I want you to know that just getting it done is my goal. It's not the amount of hours. I don't want you to put excessive amount of hours into it. I just want you to be able to do it. So if you can come up with creative ways of accomplishing that goal, I'm all for it. The way that
mhm.
we've done it before might not be the way that you do it now. You have additional strengths. Here is what I have for you. I would like it by this particular date, and I would love for you to be creative and get it done that time. Those are some ways. Help the team to not feel, as we mentioned, the micromanagement, right?
Manage.
Outcome driven, not just
Mhm.
hours driven. And then encourage breaks. Now, a lot of time when people hear breaks, they're thinking, oh, I'm telling the whole team to go on vacation. No, not really. We recognize that this is a job. We recognize that these are companies, organizations, and for it to be productive, for it to thrive, we need our workers. But also for it to thrive, we need our workers. So, what are
Yeah.
some ways that we can do that? Encouraging breaks might mean taking a step back and looking at the cycle within your company. Are there periods of times when you have a deadline that requires a lot more from your team, a lot more from team a lot more from team B during that periods of time? Look back. And if you start to see some of those patterns, maybe that's a time when you said, okay, well, once we've been able to accomplish the goal, team A, really that particular team, this is their time to stand up. And this is the time when their productivity is really going to drive and move the needle forward. After they have reached their goal, then they will need a little break. Why? Because we need them to be recharged and refocused. As we mentioned before, when you're burnt out, your executive function does not work. So you're not coming with creative ways to problem solve. So being able to provide rest and recharge, but you might want to look and take a look back and see how you can do that by following the patterns within your company.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. There's just
Mhm.
so much data out there, right, about that. Walking away from a project, taking a break, coming back with fresh
Mhm.
ideas, but on a bigger
Absolutely.
scale, even in the terms of burnout, if someone's just getting too far, that rest has to be huge.
Absolutely. Yes.
Um, well, what about like where do we start? Like, what are the most important first steps in addressing burnout, in your opinion?
I know. And these are so things. So the most important key steps in addressing burnout is number one, we want to acknowledge that burnout exists, right? This is not something we're going to just toss under the rug. It's not going to be the elephant in the room. We're going to acknowledge burnout exists. And then we're going to gather input from the team, such as you're going to do one to ones or anonymous surveys. Find out. The challenge with burnout is that the solutions are multifaceted. You want your solution to work for you and your team, right? So I can give you a solution, but if your team is not having that problem, then that solution will not work for you. How will
True.
you know? You gather the data from your team. What are they going through? And then you start to identify some of those common problems. And then you start to work with solutions that fits your team, right? So we don't want to assume, we want to be able to do things that are data driven. And then it's also important that we want to provide mentorship for the leaders to recognize. We want to provide mentorship to maybe even some of your team would like mentorship. Um, Different ways that people feel supported, it differs, right? You might have someone that wants to be able to do the same task over and over, and then you might want someone that wants the task switched, in that, like, this monotonous task in on my mind, it's just boring and I'm burnt out because I'm bored. However, if you've given me a switching of that task within that same job description, but you've switched it, then now I get to use my creativity and I'm not energized and I'm feeling refi. How would I know that? We would need to be able to communicate in order to do that. Now, if you have burnout within your team and you're looking for workshops, if you yourself can't do it, then maybe you'll need to bring someone else in to do it, right? Burnout prevention workshops, stress management workshop within your team. And that's where we come in, that, with our availability to be able to help those of you who are experiencing burnout within your team, or you can see your team heading towards burnout. We'll be able to come up with solutions to help you to do so. So, those are some of those key steps. Acknowledge it, get the data, find out what's going to work for your team. What are some of the solutions that's key to your team? If you're able to implement it yourself, go ahead. If you need help in implementing it, then pull the support in order to do so.
Yes, that's wonderful. Well, we have loved what you have shared overall, specifically on burnout. I've learned so much from, I can't wait to start my morning routine, and who knew the different signs? They were completely different than I was thinking. So a lot of wonderful
Mhm,
things. We always ask all of our speakers
mhm,
what tips in general, they can be related around burnout, they can be related to anything, but what tips do you
mhm.
have for our organizations that are trying to go from good culture to great culture?
Well, first, I want to congratulate the organization for even wanting to move from good to great, right? Because we can always just say, oh, I'm doing well and pat myself on the back and stay where you are. But some great ways to move from good to great. One of a great tip is prioritization. So being able to help your team to be able to prioritize what is important and what's not important for the immediate time, right? We have the 80-20 principle, the Pareto principle, where you're gathering what are the top 10 things that we want to accomplish. Now, out of those top 10, what are the top three? And then the other seven we will leave for the next time. Within those three things that we want to accomplish, what are the 10 most important things that we need? And then out
Mhm.
of those 10, picking the top two or three that we're going to focus on. So when we focus on our energy, those two we know what will move the needle forward. But we're not scattering our energy in 10 different directions. We're
Mhm.
focusing our energy on the two most important tasks that will bring 80% of the revenue, or 80% move the needle 80% forward, but we're zoned in on those 20%. So that's one way in moving from good to great. Now, those tasks, they can be related to goals, but there also could be wellness goals for the team, right? So we've used that principle
Mhm.
for wellness goals. You've used it for revenue goals. You can use it for retention goals. There's just so many ways you can do that. Another thing that we can do is doing the little things that matter. Now, we recognize that when you have a large organization, sometimes the person at the top, the employee might not feel very connected to that person at the top. I've
Sure.
never met the CEO. They're in a
Mhm.
different country, they're in a different state. However, our managers and our HR, you have your hand attuned to what's going on. Being able to do things that matter, such as we understand birthdays matter, getting a card from the CEO is good, but I don't know the CEO. Getting a card from my team members, I connect with you a little bit more, right? On the other hand, when I do a good job and my manager sends it off to the CEO and I get a email, a personal email from the CEO, wow, that's an impact, right? But it's such a small thing, but it has a big impact. So we see how we can really leverage ourselves within the organization. Another thing that we can definitely do is, this is a very creative thing that I've seen within an organization, is a wellness stipend. Now here, I know, I know. So if you're giving bonuses to your team, allocate a small part of the bonus as a wellness stipend. You're going to give the money to them anyway. So if you've allocated it, then they know that you're thinking wellness for the team, and it'll prompt them to do something that's important to them, and it's important to the wellness of their being and therefore the wellness of the organization. So those are just some few little
Well,
tips that I think
three
that can help you moving from good to great.
Those are three great tips. I think with the 20% and your micro focus, that actually breeds success, which is great. You need success
Mhm.
to breed more success. And then,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think when the leaders show they care about more than what our production is, about our actual health as well and
Mhm.
wellness, that's huge. That's when you really probably feel more aligned with an organization, I imagine.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
fun.
Yes.
Well, we are happy to take any questions for Dr. Beckford on this subject, for yourself, for your team. I also wanted to share how you can connect with Dr. Beckford. She's such a fantastic resource. She has a wonderful podcast you can easily find on your podcast provider of choice by just typing her
Mhm.
name in. But you can also find out more information at her website, follow her on LinkedIn, and that's very kind. You shared your email as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Um, I'm going to check if we have any questions, but I might have one or two myself. One thing I off the top of my head I was wondering about is, once someone gets to crisis mode,
Mhm.
is the recovery, is pulling them out of that, is that a long recovery, or are there like any quick remedies that can break it up and either get them back up, higher up from the crisis mode, or
Mhm.
get them out completely? Any thoughts on that? Is it a long process?
So the process differs from person to person. And because this not once you're in crisis mode, then you're kind of moved on to a little bit closer to the mental health issues. So one
Mhm.
of the things is that you want to pour resources at this person. This is the person that might need to be physically away from the job. So it's not the person that's still there. So that person might need a therapist at that time. Yeah, they
Well,
might need to be started on medications to bring them in, to bring the hormones back aligned within the body, because at that point their serotonin and their dopamine levels are almost very, very low. And as we said, the executive function is not there. So when you have someone is in crisis mode, they will need professional help. Now,
Okay.
what's important is that when they do come back, you will still need to do that one to one to find out what best ways you can support them. Because it's easy for you to assume that, well, when they come back, I'm just not going to give them that much task anymore. I'm just going to reduce their task.
Mhm.
They were working on project A, and that might have been what put them into burnout. So I'm just going to move them to project B, while they themselves might be saying, oh, I'm so glad I'm feeling better. I cannot wait to get back to work on project A. But
Wow.
you've made the assumption. So it's
Right.
best to communicate with them to see, how can I best support you? This is what I was thinking. Is this what you want? Or even do more of an open-ended question and saying, well, what are some projects that we can get you back in so that you can feel best supported and feel back to your normal self?
Okay. Related to that, we do have a question on how does one continue to work while they're in crisis mode, maybe from a personal aspect. Do you have any tips on that?
Well, you have to recognize how far in crisis mode are you, right? So crisis
Mm-hmm.
mode is anxiety and depression. Will you be able to continue to work if you are under the care of a professional, if you're under the care of a like either a therapist or a mental health professional? Yes, if you're able to get your executive functions working. However, it's important that while you're in that mode, you will need to implement certain things to make sure that you're not slipping back into worsening crisis, but you're pulling yourself out of crisis, such as
Mm-hmm.
some of even the things that we've talked about. A great thing is our morning routine. Maybe you'll need to limit those who are bringing negative energy to you and being and socializing with positive
Sure.
people. Maybe it needs that you need to invest in personal development. And when I say invest in personal development, this might just mean that you need to start reading more. Maybe it is that movement needs to be. So movement, one of the powerful things about movement and exercise, it is an actually is an antidepressant within itself. So even when I've interviewed, like I said, over 200 doctors, and I've interviewed a lot of psychiatrists. Their first treatment for depression is usually movement. And I say movement and not exercise because exercise
Mm-hmm.
might turn you off. Movement
Right.
might mean you throw on a music, something that really moves your spirit and you love, and you dance and you dance and you dance. That's
Mm-hmm.
movement. You're still releasing the positive, the endorphins. You're still releasing the dopamine. Connecting with like-minded people, as we talked about, disassociating yourself with the negative, but connecting yourself with like-minded, positive people. Even just the making that appointment. And the appointment could be a reservation to connect at a social event. The anticipatory hormone within your body, it's it's gets released. So dopamine is released when you finally meet your friend. The oxytocin, bonding hormones, and those are the same hormones that we connect with or we release when we're around each other at the same, like on a consistent basis, which is oxytocin, which is our bonding hormone. That's the
Mm-hmm.
same hormone that bonds mom to their child during, the first phases of parenthood, and that's what makes you want to take care of a child at 2 a.m., even when you're dead tired. That's the
Mm-hmm.
bonding hormone. So that's what allows you to bond with like minded people. And so it could be just implementing some of these things: mindfulness, gratitude practice. I didn't even speak too much about that. But here's the thing about, like, for anxiety, one of the ways to a natural way, of course, if you're just in a milder form of anxiety, that you can overcome that is by doing a gratitude practice. It is hard for the brain to be grateful and anxious at the same time. So if you're in anxiety mode, pull out a pen and paper and start writing down the things that you're grateful for. That anxiety mode starts to go down, and
Mm-hmm.
then the gratitude part starts to go up. So these are
Okay.
some ways. So the short answer is, yes, it's possible. However, you need to really make sure that you've implemented some steps to make sure that you're improving and moving from that crisis mode and not going worse into the crisis mode.
It's really about taking care of yourself. And I appreciate that you
Absolutely.
shared things that don't necessarily need an investment.
Yeah.
Obviously, professional development and help, but a lot of the tips you just gave are things that I mean, we can do without even having to invest in it.
Absolutely.
Um, I have another question here. What do you recommend for HR professionals who need to address mental illness disability claims? How do you
Mm.
help build a culture of conversation around this?
Alrighty. Great, great question. The biggest thing is normalizing the
Mm,
mental illness around the in the space itself. Mental illness is as it is. It's an illness just as diabetes, high blood pressure. It's once we can normalize not feeling well, getting in a state of even burnout, crisis burnout mode, then it's easier to be able to address these things within your team. Now, for the direct disability claims, that's more for occupational health. And,
okay,
that's a little bit out of the scope of what we can discuss here. However, being able to normalize and mental illness is important. A way that HR and leaders can do that is having an open door policy, but you yourself will have boundaries around it. So you might set times within your day, maybe Thursdays between 2 and 2:30. If you're feeling anyway, my doors are open, you can always drop by in order to blank. And they can stop by and they can say how they're feeling without feeling judged. And then if there are any resources that you have available, these are the time that you can provide these resources to the teams, and you can provide them to the individuals. So that's one way to
great.
come at it.
Super important. Appreciate that. Well, I do think that's all of our questions today. I just want to thank you so much for talking with our audience on this really, really
Absolutely.
important topic. We appreciate just how enlightened we are on this subject. I want to
Mhm.
remind everyone keep your eyes on your inbox for a copy of this recording for today's slides, and of course, an invitation to our next Building a Great Culture webinar that will be on May 16th. Always feel free to contact us anytime if you have questions. And thanks again, everyone, Dr. Beckford and everyone else for joining. Have a great day.